All right, so it is my great pleasure to welcome Noé Jiménez today. Like I said a few minutes ago, I had the great pleasure to read some of his seminal articles. And today Noé is going to talk on holographic metasurfaces for the new generation of biomedical ultrasound applications. So Noé, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for this introduction. Let me check this.
So maybe you go full screen.
Yeah. This one. Okay, now I have it. Okay, everything is working right now. So thank you, Sebastian, for the invitation and for this introduction. And in this seminar, I want to show you the last advances that we are doing, trying to mix these two worlds of how to engineer acoustic materials in order to shape the wavefront, have a very good control of the acoustic waves, and how to use these waves in order to produce specific biomedical ultrasound applications in the context of medical ultrasound. So you know that when we use low amplitude ultrasound, you can send waves using a transducer, and this small amount of energy and also a small amount of momentum that the wave have when echoes are producing, then you can develop a lot of different applications, either on medical imaging or also in non-destructive testing for industrial applications in order to extract information of the medium. The most famous probably is this echography ultrasound in order to see the interior of our bodies using small amplitude waves. But things really change when you use very high amplitude waves, because this energy and momentum that the wave carries, you can transfer that to the medium, and you can interact with matter in a very different amount of manners. For example, you have the possibility in order to manipulate matter and develop industrial applications, and in the biomedical field, you can develop a lot of different therapeutic ultrasound applications in order to, for example, rise and control the rise of the temperature in a specific part of your body from the exterior using a non-invasive technique, or also use this amount of momentum in order to produce some mechanical effect, not linked to the energy, to the thermal effects, but also to the pure mechanical effect. You can push tissues, you can create flows in fluid, deformations in solid, and also very important, you can interact with bubbles and create very strong cavitation effects. And this is what you can do with the matter. But when you have a biological medium, then you can induce some biological effect as a result of this interaction with the matter. And the result is that in your body, you can develop a lot of different and interesting ways to interact with the matter in a biological level. For example, you can destroy things. You can destroy things inside your body. Probably the most famous is this stone fragmentation. For example, for the for fragment the kidney stones, you can do it completely non-invasively, and you can also destroy or fragment in small pieces some clots in order to control some obstruction in the circulatory the circulatory system. And using these thermal effects, you can really rise the temperature until you essentially cook the tissue, but in a very localized way. You can have targets, for example, from 1 centimeter plus 1 millimeter plus 1 millimeter. This is the typical size of a lesion. It can be even small than this, but to have some dimensions of the lesion inside of in the mind, just this 1 millimeter cube, for example, is somehow the limit that you can have in using 1 gigahertz, which is a normal frequency in order to interact with the tissues. And also you can do it, but destroy tissues, but not using the thermal effect, not using the rise of the temperature, but using the mechanical effect, just by transferring the momentum of the wave just to the tissue. And using this cavitation, you can really create lesions with very sharp boundaries, even to the histological level. So the border is really well defined, and this technique, which is called histocrypsy, is having a lot of different applications in oncology, for example. Using the mechanical interactions with the ultrasound and the tissues, and probably using, in most of the cases, using cavitation, you can also deliver drugs in a localized manner into the different parts of the body. You can use different techniques in order to do that, and it is very interesting. I will speak about this. You can deliver drugs in the brain, and this is I will explain to you later. This is very interesting because it's very difficult actually to do it without ultrasound. And as a response of these mechanical and thermal effects that the ultrasound produce to the matter, to your cells, the body reacts. And these reactions of the body can be also used in order to develop other biomedical applications. This is the response of your body, but you can create a lot of different applications using vasoconstriction, coagulation of external bleeding. You can modulate the immune system by rising, not a lot, but just a bit, the temperature. You can increase the sensitivity to chemo, radiotherapy, and a lot of different derived effects that open the doors in order to create new biomedical applications. Let me focus on several applications, just a couple of them, in order to get in context, also on the neurological disorders. For example, this patient is suffering from an illness which is called essential tremor. Essential tremor is a motion disorder which is actually benign. You can live with this, but it impairs your ability to eat, to shave, and as a result, your quality of life is really decreased, and people is really needed a treatment in order to have a normal life. So the classical treatment of this disease is to ablate, to rise the temperature in a very specific part of the brain, which is the deep, which is a deep brain nucleus, which is a subthalamic nucleus, which is a small part of this red area, which is shown in this 3D graph, which is the ventralis intermedius nucleus. So the classical treatment is that they make a hole in your brain, in your skull actually, and they introduce some electrode, they ablate this small part of the brain. You can imagine how invasive is this technique, but it works. It is very well known that you ablating this part, you can treat this disease, but it is desirable to use a non-invasive technique, and ultrasound is being used in order to treat this disease, and is working very well to treat this specific disease. The system is just a focused transducer, this kind of helmet, huge transducer, and by using this phase array, which is composed of a lot of different elements, you can focus ultrasound waves in a specific part of the brain, And using that, you can raise the temperature and produce this thalamotomy in a non-invasive way. So the patient is awake during the treatment. He doesn't need any anesthesia, no incisions, not even boreholes, which is another holes that you need to open in order to compensate the pressure when you insert the electrode. And when the treatment finishes, the patient actually can go to the home, and the movement disorder is completely reestablished. So this is the result of writing before and after, and it's working very well. But when we need to target to this target, then you need to be very precise in order to how to control the phases of each transducer in order to focus in a specific part of the brain. This thermal ablation is right now used for a lot of different diseases. For example, it is approved outside of the US for obsessive compulsive disorder, neuropathic pain, and also inside of the US also for these motion disorders of Parkinson's disease. It's not healing the Parkinson's disease, but it's treating the motion disorders. And it's also testing in a lot of different applications in clinical trials. So it is very interesting to raise the temperature and to ablate tissues. But if you use very long exposure times and not a very high temperature rise, then you can produce in the tissues like actually it's like a local fever. And you can create these local hyperthermia treatments that are very interesting because you activate the immune system and you can really increase the sensitivity to chemotherapy or radiotherapy, and that can be used combined in order to treat some tumors in some oncology applications. This is also what I show you, applications of the rising the temperature, thermal effects, but if you use mechanical effects, you can develop also interesting applications for the brain. For example, we have actually a defense mechanism, which is the blood-brain barrier, which is a protection mechanism that protects us against infection, virus, and actually it's a part of the endothelium, which is how the endothelium is configured. And these tight junctions between the endothelial cells prevent the passage of heavy molecules. Big molecules like drugs cannot pass, also dangerous molecules. But this means that even if we have some drug to treat Alzheimer or Parkinson or whatever disease, even if we have it, you cannot deliver to the brain, and you cannot do it actually locally. So in this classical experiment, you inject some ink into an embryo, and what you get is that the whole mammal is inked. The whole ink can penetrate most of the tissues in your body, but not the central nervous system, including the spinal cord. So there are chemical ways in order to open this blood-brain barrier. For example, in this case, I am showing you how a spider venom can cause this disruption of these protection mechanisms, and you can ink or provide the passage of a drug inside of the central nervous system, but you cannot do it locally using this chemical. The only mechanism in order to do it locally is to use ultrasound combined with microbubbles. So you focus in some part of the brain an ultrasound beam, and then you inject into the bloodstream these microbubbles, which are FDA approved. They are just contrast agents for echocardiography, and they interact under the effect of the ultrasound with the tissues. The drug, which is in here in violet in this illustration, is in your bloodstream, and only in the places where the ultrasound is focused, then the endothelial cells are really excited by the cavitation of these bubbles, and only in these areas the drugs can be delivered. So as a result, we localize drug delivery applications in the brain. So this protection mechanism, in fact, is a good opportunity in order to have the local drug into your brain. But all these techniques are based in focusing. You need to focus energy into some specific part of the brain, and we have a challenge. We have a challenge because to focus a mechanical wave into the skull, into the brain, you need to go away from the skull. The skull is a very stiff and refracting medium. Actually have a multiple scattering, also a reflection, and it creates aberrations in the beams you are trying to focus inside of your brain. As a result, you want to target in some specific part of the brain, and probably if you don't use an advanced method in order to compensate these aberrations, you are going to lose the focal spot and to lose the target. It's like trying to have a clear image through this aberrating or scattering and reflecting medium. There are some solutions to this. The most intuitive one is to get rid of the skull and put the transducer below the skull. The people is doing this actually when you need to open the skull in order to resect a tumor, and then you put some transducer in order to open the blood-brain barrier and provide chemotherapy to treat the remaining tumor cells. But if you want to do it non-invasively, you can use a single element transducer. This is a simple and cheap approximation, but you have no control of these aberrations, and you can rely on simulations, but actually the focus is going to change a lot when you try to focus in different parts of the brain. Another solution is to use a phase array in order to control these aberrations using the electronic steering of the beam, but it is very difficult in order to control completely these focal aberrations, because for therapeutic applications, the elements should be bigger, and then when they are bigger, you have these diffraction lobes, and the focal steering is actually very limited to the geometric focal spot of the brain. That's why these therapeutical applications in the thalamus, which is in the center of the brain, they are working. They are doing that in clinics. But when you try to use the same system in order to move the focus and along the skull, for example, in here you can have a simulation of how the focus is in the center of the array. So in this position, the arrays, all the waves are collimated in the center, and you have a very good focal spot. But when you try to move towards the right, then you can see that you move some millimeters, and then you lose this capability of focusing, because elements are very big and they are separated more than a wavelength. This is not happening in imaging devices, but the therapeutic devices, they are very big, and they have this problem. In addition, if you look at how these therapeutical targets looks like, we have these marvelous three-dimensional shapes, and they have these shapes like hippocampus or caudate nucleus. They have strange shapes in 3D. So it will be very interesting in order to adapt the focal spot in a single shot, and without these phase arrays, with metasurface, to adapt this beam to the target. So that's why we proposed some years ago the use of acoustic holograms, which were actually proposed, but for homogeneous media, but use these acoustic holograms in order to do two things in the same shot. The first thing is that we can create an acoustic image that can match to your therapeutical target, and this can have any three-dimensional shape in any three-dimensional shape. And the other thing that this acoustic hologram can do for you is that it can compensate, it can encode all the time reversal information needed to correct the aberrations of the skull. So you can create very sharp and define acoustic images, acoustic therapeutical targets, and compensate these skull aberrations using actually a very simple system, which is a low-cost system, which can be even MRI-compatible. So if we look at how these therapeutical devices that are right now in the market and how they look like, they are composed of, probably most of them are piezoelectric, very big elements. The separation of these elements, because they are very big, is more than half a wavelength, and they will suffer from grating lobes when you try to steer really far away from the geometrical center. In this state-of-the-art devices, they are using 1,000, 2,000 elements, and these holograms can encode in each pixel of a 3D printed lens the phase and amplitude information of one element of the phase array. So you can go probably 2 orders larger than the state-of-the-art technology using actually a cheaper approach. They can have, they can be patient specific. Actually, they need to be patient specific for brain applications. They can compensate this refraction of the skull, and they are also treatment specific. They can target simultaneous focus in a therapeutical target, and they need to be designed for each patient and for each treatment. But they are cheap. You can 3D print it. So in order how we do it. So the approach is the following. So we scan the patient. We right now we are scanning using X-rays and MRI, and we are also using only MRI images in order to extract soft and hard tissue. And using that, what we do is we set a simulation using very tested methods, using pseudospectral simulations, and we set a time reversal simulation. So we set a collection of virtual sources in your simulation in the places where the target is going to be, and then you record the field in the place where the transducer is going to be, where the lens is going to be in this holographic surface. So with this phase and magnitude information at the central frequency of your source, then you design just a lens. And here you can imagine you have experience, most of you, in this metamaterial technologies. So you can imagine that there are a lot of different ways in order to do that. We are using the most simple because it's very robust. So once you have your lens, you can even test it validating using a simulation or doing your treatment in the real world. In order to construct the lens using, for us, right now is the most simple because it's the most robust way in order to construct the hologram. So we need to translate this phase and amplitude information into encode that into a hologram, into a lens. And we do that by matching the phase of the transmission of an elastic fabric resonator to the phase conjugated phase of the holographic recorder field. In order to do that, we just use an in-vivo method in order to know how is the height of each elastic resonator. It's just a slab of elastic material in order to match the phases of the transmission at the holographic plane. Once you have this information, then you just build your STL and then you 3D print it and you can do the treatment. For example, in these validation experiments, we just using either 3D printed skulls or even real skulls from donors, or experiments with living animals. So let's see how they works. For example, this is the field in water. When you have a focused ultrasound transducer and it is working at half a mega. So what you have in here is not a sharp focal spot. What you have, because you have diffraction, you have a limited aperture source in here, so you have this elongated focal spot. Remember this because this is going to change when you use this hologram inside of the brain. So this should be, in fact, the better you can do it in an homogeneous media. Actually, when you place the skull, you see that the focal spot is completely aberrated. You lose amplitude, you lose localization, and when you develop hologram in order to compensate these aberrations and refocus in a focal spot, you retrieve what you have in the homogeneous medium. You can do even better than this. You can, for example, target simultaneously at two focal spots and adapting this acoustic image to the target. And what you need to have in mind is that if you use a limited aperture source at a given frequency, what you retrieve is not a perfect acoustic image, it's a diffraction limited image of the time reversal process. So this is how the time reversal targets looks like, and this is how you can proceed the treatment. In this case was an example using an hippocampus. So we tested that with several targets, for example, just for fun actually, with these self-bending beams that can bend along a given arbitrary trajectory. You need to have in mind that hippocampus, for example, have this target, actually this shape, and you can really test using experimental simulations that you can really adapt the trajectory and simultaneously correct the aberrations of the skull. This was the PhD work of Sergio Jiménez Gambin, which is, I think he's connected right now, is now in Colombia. And but you can do it, you can do more things with this. For example, because you can encode a lot of information in these face plates, in these holograms, you can use a specific part of the skull in order to go to this. And we choose the thinnest part because you need to induce low thermal dose in this skull for different brain applications. So if you realize the temporal window, which is in this part of the head of your head, is very thin actually, you can break it in this specimen if you just put your finger, and you can use this small part in order to target to the deep brain nuclei, for example, the thalamic nucleus, and even have a bilateral focusing by using this small aperture. For example, in this case, we were using just a 5 centimeter target, which is this work is the work of Diana, which is a PhD student with us in here in Valencia. You can focus even more exotic beams. For example, you can focus acoustic vortices. Probably the people who knows what acoustic vortices can be used for, they are thinking of dropping things, dropping particles, dropping bubbles. And this was what we intended to develop in here. And we developed this face plate that have the ability to encode a vortex inside of the brain, and in addition compensate the aberrations of the skull. As a result, you can really focus a very sharp acoustic vortex inside of the skull, and you can even trap particles with these single beam applications. We were thinking on trapping collections of bubbles in order to do drug delivery, local drug delivery. So all of this was laboratory work and simulations. So we needed to know if this technology really works with animals in vivo and can be used with humans in a near future, actually. So we tested that. We get in contact with Columbia University, and our PhD student went there in order to develop these experiments. And we were trying to opening the blood-brain barrier and providing drug delivery in 2 bilateral focal spots in the brain of a small laboratory animal in a mouse. So this how is the system looks like. You have a transducer in here, and then you have the acoustic hologram, which is coupled to the therapeutical transducer. And we also place an imaging transducer inside confocal in here in order to localize where the skull is, and also to monitor the cavitation activity of the microbubbles during the therapy. So the hologram was designed to have two sharp focal spots inside of the head of a mice, and this is how the hologram looks like, and this is the 3D printing of the hologram. And we first tested this hologram in water. So this is what we get in water. What we get in water is that we got these diffraction limited focal spots. They are very elongated in the axial direction. The source is in this position. This is just the coupling cone, and the target is in here. So instead of having two bright focal spots, you have these elongated focal spots, which is the thing that you can do with two different transducers. So this is the better you can do it for having this diffraction limited image. But we were really surprised when we went to the real problem with the skull. This is what we get in the simulation. You see, what we get is that not only in the transverse field, but also in the axial plane, we have these bright focal spots. What is happening here is that the hologram is not only encoding the single shot, the single focusing wavefront, but also encoding all the reverberation inside of the skull. And this is very interesting because this reverberation increases the angular spectrum of the wavefront, and what you have is a very sharp focal spots, not in the transverse plane, but also in the axial plane. So in this dashed line, what we get is this is the hologram working in water. This is what you get in a standard focus transducer, this diffraction limited. And if we compare with the better that you can do with this spherical Bayesian function, which is the gray line, we are close to the diffraction limit. So this kaleidoscopic effect that was studied using reversal method for Matthias Fink long time ago, we can encode this information with this hologram, and you can do with a cheaper medium, with a cheaper technology, better than the phase arrays. And the interesting part of this work is that once you have this local acoustic field, this acoustic field produces cavitation. This cavitation opens the blood-brain barrier locally, and we get these two bright and very localized focal spots in, and we deliver some contrast agent for the MRI imaging, this gadolinium, and we can see that effectively we open the blood-brain barrier into bilateral focal spots. This was doing only mechanical effects to the brain, but we can do it also thermal holograms. And in collaboration with Jonathan Bapou, with Université de Strasbourg in France, we tried to rise the temperature of the tissues using the patterns, acoustical patterns controlled by a hologram. So this was the first pattern we tested. Just this is the shape of the tube. And this is how the hologram looks like with the transducer. We make the transducer 3D printed and MRI compatible. This is what the simulation and direct measurements of the acoustic field looks like. And when you place an infrared camera in order to see how you can really rise the temperature in some tissue, in this case was a liver tissue. So you can see how the temperature rises in a thermal simulation as a result of the energy transfer to the absorbing medium. And with this camera, we can see that effectively we can really produce some thermal pattern that matches the shape of the acoustic field. This was not very convincing for us because the infrared camera only can measure in the surface of the tissue, and we wanted to know what is happening inside of the tissue. So we went to this MRI thermometry using this Siemens device with this 1.5 Tesla. And using this gelatin milk phantom, we did measurements inside of the tissue, and we, with lower resolution, because this MRI thermometry have a lower resolution, we can clearly see that we can rise the temperature in a controlled manner using this cheap technology. To having this pattern of the tissue is very nice to have a paper, but it's not very interesting for the biomedical community. It's more interesting to adapt the target to a spheroid, for example, to treat some tumor. And this is what we did. We developed another transducer, which is MRI-compatible also. We put a very designed holographic lens. This transducer is already focused. This is the focal here in the inset. You can see how is the temperature to rise in the simulation and here in the measurements of the transducer without any lens. So you have a focal spot. And our goal was to adapt really this target to some given spheroid. And we tested that. And in fact, the simulations and measurements were quite similar. And we can adapt the thermal pattern to the specific target. So our PhD student also worked with this kind of holograms in order to do in vitro and also in vivo experiments for ultrasonic hyperthermia. I need to remember you that ultrasonic hyperthermia, we are not looking to ablate the tissue, just to rise the temperature and produce this local fever in order to modulate the immune system and modulate also the evolution of a tumor. And what we were looking in here, so what we're looking in here is to rise the temperature in this case, tumor spheroids, which are collection of cells, three-dimensional collections, where you can really study in the laboratory the evolution of tumors in a very realistic way. But the problem was to obtain really homogeneous fields along this collection of spheroids. And the first thing that you come in mind is to produce an uniform field all around all targets. And if you do that, what you have is that even when you have a uniform field, the diffusion of the temperature is different for the central part than from the exterior part. So the uniform field doesn't produce an uniform temperature distribution and a uniform thermal dose on the spheroids. So we wanted to use a non-uniform field, but to produce an uniform temperature distribution, which is another level of optimization, let's say. So using these holograms, we not only control the acoustic field, but we also control the uniformity of the temperature distribution all around the target. Using this system, we are right now testing how these hyperthermia treatments can modulate the evolution of tumor cells and with radiotherapy or chemotherapy treatments. So concluding, these acoustic holograms can can compensate the aberrations of stiff layers, for example, the skull. You can really generate sharp acoustic images, arbitrary in principle. And one of the good things is that you can really use low-cost systems, because for the clinical solutions of some of to cure an illness, if we have a machine that is very precise, very powerful, but it can be used only for a very small part of the population, this is not solving the solution. This is not solving the Alzheimer. This is not solving any of the problems that or health problems that our society have. In order to really solve the health problems, we need to have solutions that are real, that can be applied in any hospital around the world. And that's why we really want to develop more and go to the clinics with these low-cost systems. Not only because they do the things, but also because they can really do the things for all the people. As a drawbacks, these holograms, they need to be patient-specific, but they are cheap. They can do it. Actually, this is not a very drawback. You need to develop your system to do that. They are narrowband, but for therapeutic applications, actually, this is not really a problem because the spectrum for therapeutic applications is very narrow, but it will be desirable for the therapeutic applications. For example, for histotripsy comes into mind for me, in order to have a broadband holograms, so broadband metamaterials in order to do that. We are using only these face plates right now, but we are testing phononic crystal and metamaterials in order to control not only the phase, but also the amplitude, and encode in the same plate the phase and the amplitude. With the phase only, you can do a lot of things that I show you, but we have a better control. The better you can do is when you control the phase and the amplitude of the acoustic wavefront. And we are testing right now these designs using these plates in non-human primates in collaboration with CSIC. It's an hospital in Madrid, in Spain. And also we have plans to develop and to use these lenses in human trials in New York in collaboration with Columbia Hospital. And actually the holy grail of all this technology will be to have reconfigurable holograms, these spatial sound modulators, but for high amplitude acoustic waves. So thank you for having me here, and I acknowledge all my findings and the people who did the most part of the work, and Sergio, Diana, and all the PhD students that work with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Noé, for this wonderful talk. I mean, it's absolutely amazing what you can achieve nowadays. So obviously, I welcome people. People do please ask questions. I've got 1,000 questions, but